morning, Rod Fleming here. Sunny morning in France. It's a little cool, but I think it's going to be a nice day. Anyway, today, this morning, I want to talk about transgenderism and cultural influence on it. Now, we'll just quickly get the terms out of the way. In this video, I'm going to use transgenderism to cover anyone who was born one sex but wishes to appear as being of the gender, or appear in the gender associated with the other, right? So if you were born male and wish to appear feminine, if you're born female and wish to appear male, right? So that would be MTF in the first case and FTM, transgenders, okay? We're not going to split it down into HSTS, autogynephilic, that sort of thing just now. The other term that I'm going to use is social intolerance, and I use this term, for reasons I'll explain, to describe all the negative reactions that trans people get, that transgender people get from the society around them. The whole shebang, everything. We're going to put them all together in one bag and we're going to call it social intolerance, and you'll see why soon. Now, all of the literature that discusses this makes it quite clear that there is a significant cultural influence on the appearance of transgender. What that is to say, what that means is that there are people who are extremely dysphoric, right? That is, they have extreme transgender feelings. And they will become transgender basically no matter what happens, right? And then there are those who aren't very dysphoric. And they might not actually transition if the resistance around them is sufficient that they don't want to. If they feel afraid, or if they feel that they will be abused, or if they feel that they will lose their job or other privileges that they have if they appear to be transgender. And that leads to a problem in assessing how many transgender people there are, because you can't see them all. We know from Blanchard that one group of male to feminine transgender people, the non-homosexual ones, are on a scale of development with people who might be described as secret cross-dressers. And we could look at Bruce Caitlyn Jenner, for example, not the only one, but a very high-profile one, who has a published history. There have been many news stories and reports of her secret cross-dressing going back to the 1980s. And you know, it's 30 years. It's well known. And this is a classic expression of the autogynephilic MTF transgender. And the simple fact is, whether or not they appear as transgender, whether they actually appear as women, depends on two things. First is the intensity of their transgender feelings, normally called dysphoria, and secondly is the resistance they're getting from the society around them. Now, Jenner is a very rich, wealthy, successful person who basically could do anything he wanted, right? So, not a problem for her to do it. Others might not be in that position. And if you live in a society which exhibits very strong social intolerance, what you might do is you might dress in private and hide it. And when you go to work, you might just put on a suit, like I'm wearing today, nice little Orvis one. Anyway, I'm not wearing frilly knickers under it, I hasten to add. But that's what a lot of people will do, is they'll put on their business suit, go to work, or their overalls, whatever they work in, and, you know, just to keep in touch with the transgender element of their personalities, they might be wearing a garter, or a bra under their shirt, or a pair of frilly knickers, you know, something like that, women's clothing. It's particularly common amongst autogynephiles, who, remember, are, colloquially we might say this, that they are in love with the idea of themselves as women. So they're in love with themselves as women. And it's kind of like they have this with them all the time, so they wear female clothing underneath their male apparel. We find the same thing if you read Zucker, Bailey, Blanchard and et alia, you'll find, et alii, just to be non-sexist, you'll find that amongst HSTS, that's homosexual transsexuals. Now these ones are the ones who, in the case of MTF, have only ever been interested in men. They've never had any interest in sexual interest or romantic interest in women whatsoever. In fact, it would not be too much to say that they're kind of repulsed by the idea of sex with women. It's something they don't like at all. They're hostile to the idea, the very idea of it. They're extremely homosexual. The same is true in the inverse in female to masculine. They're very powerfully reject the idea of sex with the opposite sex. Now obviously you should immediately see that just as there's a crossover between the secret crossdresser and the full-blown in the street non-homosexual transgender person, at the same time within this group of the homosexual type, yes, there is a separation, or there is a continuum that goes between feminine homosexual men and male to feminine transsexuals, transgenders in this case. Okay, it's complicated because I'm not using the language I usually use, but never mind, bear with me. For many years, to give a very good illustration of this, Ken Zucker, this is an area I strongly disagree with him, felt that it was a far better outcome for a boy who exhibited strong gender non-conforming or cross-gender feelings and behaviour. It was a better idea that he would turn into a gay man, a feminine gay man, than into a transsexual, into a trans woman. I completely disagree with that. I think it's nearly always the case that these boys will feel more comfortable and they probably have better lives as women. They don't have to have all the operations. A lot of the concern by professionals like Zucker and Bailey and others is they're thinking about the surgeries. But to be honest with you, well, we'll come back to that. We'll come back to the surgeries and stuff. Now, that means that there's an awful lot of people in any society who could potentially be transgender if the social circumstances changed, which is what you're seeing in the West just now, right? If we go back to the 1980s, say, which I remember clearly, I knew quite a few transsexuals, HSTS transsexuals, in the early 1980s, and they all vanished. They all just disappeared. Now, nothing bad happened to them. They did a thing called woodworking. They all had they all had genital reconstruction surgeries. They all had, their bottom surgery, and they had the hormone and boob surgery. Once they were happy that they could just live as a woman, they simply vanished. They cut off all their ties with anyone who would have known them in their previous life as small, pretty gay boys, which is what they all were to start with. And they went. And I don't know what happened to them. I presume, I was a journalist I am a journalist, and I worked in that area for many, many years, and I presume that had anything terrible happened to them, I would probably have heard about it. I suspect they all are living happily as women now. And that's that. They may be adopted kids, and they've probably had very good lives. So you can't say that that's a bad outcome for them. Having said that, today things are much, much more open. I spend a lot of time in Asia, as you probably know, and that is a culture across Asia. There is a significant amount of discrimination and social intolerance, particularly in places like the Philippines, which is very strongly Catholic, and in Muslim areas like Indonesia and Malaysia. But even in the Philippines, it's nothing like what it was in Europe in the 1980s. I mean, people do not get beaten up or killed for being trans. They just don't. It doesn't happen. Yes, trans women get killed, but it's not because they're trans. It's because they have abusive boyfriends. That's the same reason as other women get killed by their boyfriends. There's no real difference here. It's not specifically because they're trans. It's not a form of social intolerance against trans people. So it's a much more open society. And there you find that people are much more open about this, and there's much less of a feeling that one must have, that the girls must have genital surgery, than was the case certainly that I was aware of in Edinburgh in the 1980s, where all these girls were determined that's what they had to have. And I think that comes from the fact that the society is more open and accepting, and they know that, I mean, a lot of them wouldn't be able to afford the surgery, but also that they don't feel that it's a necessary part of their transition. For a homosexual transsexual, they don't usually hate their bodies. They just want men. And it's like, I'm going to make myself a woman so that I can get men. And if she goes, well, actually men don't mind my dick, then she'll go, well, if they don't mind it, well, fine, I'll just keep it, you know. So you get this kind of laissez-faire thing going on, which I think is quite healthy, actually. I mean, I am generally opposed to the idea of surgery if you can possibly avoid it, especially really major irreversible surgery like this. You know, once your penis has been, it's not removed, but it's basically inverted, peeled apart like a banana, the interior scraped out and it's stitched up back inside you. Once that's been done, you ain't getting it back. And the exact same is true for genital surgery on feminine to masculine transgender people. They cut out your vagina and try and form a cosmetic penis, and you ain't getting your vagina back. It's gone forever. So and your boobs are gone, you know, and things like that. And I generally speaking think that a better solution is to not do that if you can live without it. You know, it's cosmetic surgery. Let's just remember this. All of this stuff that is done in the course of transition is purely cosmetic. It has no physiological effect whatsoever. Absolutely none. I think maybe you can understand where I'm coming from. I'm going, do you really want to do that? So, to get back to the point, we're beginning to see in the West a greater tolerance for trans people, such that maybe there will be a bit less of an emphasis on these surgeries, which would be a good thing. But it is also leading to an increase in the numbers of visible trans, the number of people coming forward who are saying, look, you know, I want to change my gender. I'm born male, but I want to live as a woman. And that is fine. We absolutely should not have a problem with that, because they're not doing anyone any harm, and you know, we all own our own bodies. I'm a libertarian. You own your own body. It doesn't belong to the group. It doesn't belong to your family. It belongs to you. And you own your own life. Similarly, it doesn't belong to other people. It belongs to you. So yes, you absolutely get the choice. And we should strongly defend people who make choices like that and resist those who attack them for making choices like that, because it is their choice. These are things that are open to all of us. If you want to do that, you should be able to do it without, you know, suffering opprobrium from society about it. So what this brings us to is the idea that we don't know how many people are out there who might possibly be trans in these classic models, which in the male to feminine sense is the homosexual transsexual, the person who was gender non-conforming as a child, desperately attracted to men, is extremely feminine in appearance, just really, really feminine, and finds it just, it's more comfortable to live as a girl. It just works, you know, it's fine, they feel better that way. And the other type being the autogynephile type, who have a far more complex etiology. It's a very interesting and unusual condition that they have, in which they invent a second character, you know, which is a woman, and this woman eventually develops to the point where she takes over. Now, that overtaking of the male host will happen sooner if there's less social intolerance. You know, if it's not going to have any consequences on your life, you're not going to lose your job, you're not going to find your bank accounts closed, you're not going to have your car repossessed, your family's not going to throw you out, then you're much more likely to stop with the secret cross-dressing and just come out and say, look, I've had it. I'm going to be a woman now. You're basically going to let the female character, and then a lot of them, if you read the narratives, even the Westerns, they'll talk about letting the woman out. And that's basically what they mean. They say, well, you know, they feel more comfortable in this second character, who they've invented as a woman, and so let's just go with that. So it's the comfort. It's about comfort, you know. If they're more comfortable in a character and not going to experience discomfort because of social intolerance, then they'll go for it. If they're less comfortable in the character and they know the social intolerance will be high if they do transition, then they're unlikely to. So there's a kind of floating population in between these two things. With the HSTS, you've got those who are they going to appear as grow up into gay men or into transsexual women? It depends a lot on the things that happen in their development, in their childhood, and the people around them. Same is true of the autonomy. Now, right now, I want to be brief here, we're seeing a very large increase in the number of people presenting for as trans. And think back there a minute. I've just said that culture, the influence of people around you, it's really important on whether you come out or not as trans. Now, let's suppose that you live in a culture where being trans is rewarded, right? Well, you might come out as trans with very little provocation. You might even just try it and go, I wonder if that's going to be for me. And that's what's happening in the West, in snowflake culture. Because snowflake culture is predicated on two things. It's a number of things. But one of the things it's predicated on is the abolition of gender, right? Which is a feminist imperative. Feminists have for many years tried their hardest to suggest that gender is not innate and therefore it can be got rid of. Because this culture is so influenced by the ideas of modern feminism, there are many of both sexes within it who think, well, you know, no problem. Gender's just it's like a coat, you know, it's like a jacket. I can just take it off, put it on, you know. Justin Riley Dennis would be a classic example. It's a guy, but he thinks that growing his hair long and wearing a dress, he's a woman now. So this causes a third problem, which is that within this culture that we're looking at, which is millennial culture in nature, you're seeing an actual peer pressure on young people to become trans, even if they're not really, you know. It's just, that will make me look better in the eyes of the peer group that I'm trying to impress. Therefore, maybe I should do it. And we saw exactly the same thing with emo culture in the 90s, gay culture in the 80s. I mean, I can very clearly remember that many people became gay because it was fashionable. They just did. They weren't gay at all. You know, you still have sex. If you're a guy, you know, sex is sex. It doesn't matter how you do it. Oh, don't worry about all those religious taboos. They're meaningless. They weren't really gay, but they liked the lifestyle, so they joined into it. And I'm saying that I think there's a big problem coming up here with snowflake culture and people who are not really trans at all, but they're jumping on this trans bandwagon for, some people call it the oppression points, just to appear good in the eyes of their peers, all of which is fine. But, there's a big but. In the 1980s, what killed being gay as a fashion, right, was HIV. It was AIDS. And it killed literally. I mean, I had good friends that died. Lots of people died. It is not a good idea to start adopting these things just for the reasons of fashion. And that's what snowflake culture is doing. These people aren't trans, but they think it's fashionable and it fits the group mentality if they appear to be. If they then go along that line, and if they're encouraged by professionals particularly to have irreversible surgeries, then they've done huge damage to themselves. And that's something we have to be very careful we don't encourage, or in fact I would say we should prevent. I think that at the moment it's far too easy for people everywhere to get cross-gender cosmetic surgeries. They're not necessary. I know plenty of trans women walking around there and they've still got their dicks, they have perfectly good lives, they're beautiful, they're lovely. It's not a problem. You don't need these operations.